Who the avoidant actually marries is rarely who the avoidant was most obsessed with, and that single truth hooks people because it collides with the fantasy everyone carries. The fantasy says, if the connection was intense, if the chemistry was electric, if they kept coming back, if they looked jealous, if they couldn't let you go, then surely you must be the one they'll commit to. Surely intensity equals destiny. Surely the person who triggers their deepest feelings will be the person they choose in the end. But avoidant psychology doesn't work like that. For an avoidant, obsession and commitment are not always connected. In fact, obsession can be the very thing that prevents commitment, because obsession often comes with emotional intensity, and emotional intensity threatens the one thing avoidants protect more than love: control. Control over pace. Control over closeness. Control over access. Control over their own vulnerability. When someone makes them feel too much, too fast, too deeply, their nervous system doesn't translate it as romance, it translates it as danger. Not because you are dangerous, but because being seen that deeply forces them to face themselves, and facing themselves has never felt safe. So when we say they marry, the safe bet, we're not saying they marry someone better than you, or more worthy than you, or more special than you. We're saying they marry the option that their nervous system can tolerate long-term without feeling exposed. They marry the dynamic that keeps their defenses calm. They marry the relationship that doesn't demand emotional transformation every week. They marry the person who, for them, represents predictability, manageable expectations, and fewer moments where they feel cornered by intimacy. This is why the key phrase here is safe bet, not soulmate. A safe bet is someone who feels low risk to their nervous system. Low risk can look like a partner who doesn't ask for deep emotional conversations. Low risk can look like someone who isn't confrontational when things feel off. Low risk can look like someone who admires them so much they rarely challenge them. Low risk can look like someone who fits the image, the family expectations, the social right choice. Low risk can also look like someone who is a little emotionally distant themselves, because two emotionally distant people can create a partnership that feels stable on the outside while staying protected on the inside. And here's the part that stings: the avoidant often experiences high connection partners as high risk, not because you did anything wrong, but because the bond triggers their unhealed attachment wounds. A high connection partner reflects their inconsistency. A high connection partner notices their avoidance. A high connection partner requires real repair. A high connection partner expects emotional presence. And for an avoidant, that expectation doesn't feel like love, it feels like pressure. So what do? They run, they rationalize, they label you as too much, too intense, too emotional, when in reality what you were doing was asking for the kind of relationship that forces growth. That's why obsession is common with avoidance. Obsession allows distance. Obsession can be experienced from far away. They can fantasize, they can remember, they can miss you, they can feel safe loving you in their mind, because in their mind they control the closeness. But commitment is different. Commitment is daily exposure. Commitment is being accountable when you're tired. Commitment is being consistent when you feel triggered. Commitment is being emotionally present when your instinct is to shut down. Commitment is not a feeling, it is a lifestyle. And for many avoidants, lifestyle-level intimacy is what they fear, not because they don't want love, but because love requires them to drop their armor. So they choose the safe bet. And you need to understand how the avoidant justifies this choice, because it explains why it can feel so confusing. They will call the safe bet peace. They'll say, it's easier, it's drama-free, it just works. But sometimes what they mean is, I don't feel challenged, I don't feel exposed, I don't have to talk about emotions, I don't have to repair. They confuse emotional quiet with emotional health. But quiet can be numbness. Quiet can be avoidance. Quiet can be two people who never go deep enough to trigger the truth. This keynote hooks viewers because it answers the painful question everyone asks after an avoidant leaves. Why would someone who felt so strongly about me not choose me? And the answer is not always that they didn't love you. Sometimes the answer is that your love was too real for their defenses. Your connection required courage. Your relationship required presence. And they chose a partner that required less vulnerability. But here's the liberating part: their choice is not a verdict on your worth. It is evidence of their capacity. It is evidence of what their nervous system can handle. It is evidence of what they prioritize: comfort over growth, stability on paper over depth in reality, predictability over transformation. And once you see that clearly, you stop chasing the fantasy that if you had been easier, you would have been chosen. Because you don't want to be chosen as the safe bet. You don't want to be chosen because you asked for less. You want to be chosen because someone is emotionally capable of more. So this keynote is the wake, up call, the avoidant often marries not the one who awakened their heart the most, but the one who triggered their fear the least. And the moment you understand that, you stop taking their commitment decisions personally, and you start evaluating what you actually want. A partner who chooses you because they are brave enough for real intimacy, not because you are quiet enough to keep their defenses asleep. Avoidants choose what keeps their nervous system calm, not necessarily what makes their heart feel alive. And the moment you understand this, the entire safe bet mystery becomes painfully logical. Because most people assume dating choices are made by love, attraction, and compatibility. But for an avoidant, especially one who hasn't done real inner work, the decision-making center is often fear management. Their relationship choices aren't always based on, who do I deeply want, but on, who feels emotionally manageable. And manageable in avoidant psychology means less exposure, less intensity, less pressure to be accountable, less risk of being emotionally overwhelmed. Ladies and gentlemen, nervous system calm is not the same as happiness. Calm can be genuine peace, yes, but calm can also be emotional numbness. Calm can be distance. Calm can be control. Calm can be the absence of demands. For avoidants, calm often means they can breathe without feeling like someone is looking into their soul. Calm means they don't feel cornered by vulnerability. Calm means they can stay in their comfort zone, where connection exists, but intimacy doesn't go too deep. And that comfort zone is built from early learning. Many avoidants learned, consciously or unconsciously, that closeness comes with a cost. Maybe they were criticized when they had needs. Maybe they were punished for emotions. Maybe caretakers were inconsistent, smothering one moment and absent the next. Maybe love felt conditional, tied to performance or silence or independence. So their system formed a rule: needing is dangerous, depending is risky, closeness leads to pain. They may not say these things out loud, but they live them. Their body flinches at intimacy even while their heart wants connection. That's why intense love can feel like danger. When a partner is deeply emotional, highly connected, or very attuned, it creates an emotional mirror. It reflects the avoidance inconsistencies. It notices their withdrawal. It asks for clarity. It invites depth. It requires repair. And that can trigger the avoidance internal alarm, not because the partner is too much, but because the avoidance nervous system interprets emotional closeness as a loss of control. So the avoidant begins to seek calm the way someone seeks oxygen. They find partners who don't light up that alarm. They gravitate toward relationships that feel predictable and low pressure. And this is where people get fooled. Because on the outside, the avoidant looks like they're finally stable. They look like they've grown. They look like they're ready. But sometimes what you're seeing isn't growth, it's compatibility with their defenses. You're seeing a partner who doesn't push the same emotional buttons, so the avoidant doesn't have to confront the same internal fears. In other words, they didn't necessarily become more mature. They found someone who requires less maturity from them. Now, what does calm look like in real life? Calm looks like a partner who doesn't ask many questions. Calm looks like a partner who doesn't require emotional check-ins. Calm looks like a partner who doesn't confront inconsistency. Calm looks like a relationship where problems are avoided rather than repaired. Calm looks like communication that stays on the surface, friendly, practical, routine. Calm looks like we don't fight, but sometimes they don't fight because nobody speaks the truth. Calm can also look like admiration. When someone admires the avoidant feels powerful, and power feels safe. Admiration doesn't demand vulnerability. Admiration doesn't ask for emotional depth. Admiration allows the avoidant to stay protected while still receiving validation. That validation soothes the avoidant's insecurity without requiring intimacy. And then there's structured calm, the partner who fits the life plan. They make sense socially, financially, culturally, or family-wise. They reduce uncertainty. They offer a clear path. For an avoidant, a clear path can feel safer than a deep bond. Because deep bonds are unpredictable, they bring emotions, conflict, repair, and vulnerability. Structure offers stability without emotional exposure. This is why avoidants sometimes leave the person they were crazy about and commit to someone else who looks less intense. Their nervous system is choosing the relationship that lets them stay regulated. And regulation becomes the priority because dysregulation feels like danger. The avoidant isn't asking, who do I love most? They're asking, who makes me feel least threatened? Now here is the part that can free the viewer from self-blame. If you were the high-connection partner, the one who wanted depth, clarity, and emotional presence, you were not. Too much. You were simply too real for their current capacity. Your presence required them to show up. Your love invited them to grow. Your standards asked for accountability, and if they weren't ready, they experienced that as pressure. So they choose calm. But calm without growth has a price. It can create a marriage that looks stable but feels emotionally distant. It can create a partnership where both people are polite roommates instead of deeply connected lovers. It can create a life where there's no drama, but there's also no depth. And this is the most important distinction of this keynote. Calm is not the goal. Secure is the goal. Secure love can handle intensity because it doesn't interpret intensity as danger. Secure love can handle conflict because it knows how to repair. Secure love can handle needs because it doesn't shame them. Avoidant calm often avoids those things, and that is why it feels soothing. It's not because it's healthier, it's because it's less challenging. So when you understand that avoidants choose nervous system calm, you stop comparing yourself to the safe bet. You stop thinking, why was I not chosen? You start seeing the truth. You were not rejected because you lacked value. You were rejected because you triggered growth, and they chose a dynamic that let them avoid it. And that is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of what their nervous system was still too afraid to face. There are 3 safe bet types avoidants most often commit to. And this keynote is powerful because it turns the mystery into a pattern you can actually recognize. When people are hurt, they keep asking, why them, not me, as if it's random. But avoidant commitment is rarely random. It follows the path of least emotional threat. The avoidant is not always choosing the deepest love. They're choosing the relationship that demands the least vulnerability while still giving them stability, validation, and a life that works. The first safe bet is the low-demand partner. This is the person who doesn't ask for much emotional intimacy. They may be independent, busy, emotionally low, expressive, or simply not the type to press for deep conversations. They don't require constant reassurance. They don't question silence. They don't demand repair every time something feels off. They might be the type who says, it's fine, quickly, and truly moves on, or avoids the topic altogether. To an avoidant nervous system, this feels like freedom. The avoidant can come close without fear of being emotionally cornered. They can stay in the relationship without feeling like they're failing someone's emotional needs every week. The low-demand partner reduces the avoidant's anxiety because the avoidant doesn't have to perform closeness. They can love from a safer distance, and the partner doesn't interpret that distance as rejection. But notice the hidden cost. If the avoidant never has to stretch, they never have to grow. If no one asks for repair, repair skills never develop. So the relationship can look calm and stable, but the emotional depth may remain limited. It becomes peaceful not because both are secure, but because nobody is touching the pain points. The second safe bet is the high admiration partner. This is the person who sees the avoidant as a prize. They idealize them. They're impressed by them. They may feel lucky to have them. They rarely challenge them because they fear losing them. They accept inconsistency as they're busy. They accept distance as they need space. They accept breadcrumbs as least they're trying. And to an avoidant, admiration is comforting because admiration doesn't require vulnerability. Admiration is one-way warmth. Admiration feeds the ego without demanding emotional exposure. The avoidant gets to feel powerful, desired, important, and that power soothes the underlying insecurity many avoidants carry. This is why admiration can be more addictive than love for an avoidant. Love asks them to be seen. Admiration lets them be praised. Love asks for accountability. Admiration often forgives without repair. Love requires mutuality. Admiration can survive imbalance. So the avoidant feels safe committing here because they don't have to face their worst fear, being confronted with their shortcomings. They can stay protected while still being valued. But again, there's a cost. If someone admires you too much to hold you accountable, the relationship can become a silent agreement. I won't challenge your emotional unavailability, and you won't leave. That can create years of stability on paper and loneliness in private. The avoidant may feel safe, but the partner may slowly lose themselves trying to maintain the bond. The third safe bet is the emotionally structured partner. This is the one that makes sense. They fit the image. They fit the family. They fit the culture, the timeline, the social circle. They bring predictability. They're practical. They may be more traditional, more organized, more focused on life building than emotional depth. This partner often offers stability through structure, schedules, routines, shared goals, social approval. For an avoidant, structure can feel safer than emotion. Structure reduces uncertainty. It gives a plan. It removes the messy unknowns of feelings, conflict, and vulnerability. The avoidant can commit to a structure without necessarily committing to emotional exposure. This is why avoidants sometimes marry someone who looks perfect on paper, but doesn't reflect their deepest emotional self. Because the structured partner allows them to fulfill the role of marriage without facing the intense intimacy that marriage can require. It's safer to commit to a plan than to commit to emotional risk. Now here's the part that changes how you view yourself. If you were the high connection partner, you were likely none of these three types. You asked for depth, you asked for truth, you asked for repair, you asked for presence. You didn't accept fog, you didn't accept half love. And that made you feel hard to them. But what you actually were was emotionally honest. You were the kind of partner that forces growth. You were the kind of love that touches the wound. So the avoidant chooses a safe bet because safe bet partners don't trigger the same internal alarms. They don't activate the fear of being exposed. They don't demand emotional transformation. They allow the avoidant to stay regulated, even if that regulation is built on distance. And this keynote is not meant to make you bitter toward the safe bet partner. It's meant to free you from comparison, because you are not competing on value. You were in a different category. You represented depth, and depth is the avoidant's biggest fear until they become emotionally mature. So don't ask, why did they choose them? Ask the better question, what did their nervous system choose? It chose a dynamic that required less vulnerability. It chose a partner that allowed them to keep their defenses. It chose safety over transformation. And the moment you understand these three safe bets, you stop trying to become one. You stop lowering your needs to look easy. You stop shrinking to be tolerated. Because being a safe bet might get you commitment, but it can cost you your soul. And the real goal is not to be chosen by someone who chooses comfort over growth. The real goal is to be loved by someone who is brave enough for depth. Avoidants don't just marry a person, they marry a dynamic. And that one line changes everything because it stops you from obsessing over the other person and starts revealing the real decision being made. People get stuck staring at the face, the looks, the status, the lifestyle, the personality, and they ask, what do they have that I don't? But the avoidance choice is often not about a better person, it's about a safer system. It's about a dynamic that protects their defenses and keeps their nervous system regulated. Ladies and gentlemen, when an avoidant marries a dynamic, they are marrying a specific emotional arrangement. They are marrying predictable roles, predictable closeness, predictable distance, predictable expectations. The avoidant is not always thinking, I want the deepest bond. They are thinking, I want the least emotional risk with the most life stability. That's why the dynamic matters more than the spark. So what is a dynamic? A dynamic is the unspoken contract between two people, the rules of how love is expressed, how conflict is handled, how needs are negotiated, and how closeness is regulated. In a secure dynamic, the unspoken contract is, we can be honest, we can have needs, we can repair, we can stay present. In an avoidant, friendly dynamic, the unspoken contract often becomes, we keep things light, we don't press too much, we avoid heavy emotional conversations, we don't demand constant closeness, we give each other space, and we move forward without digging too deeply. That contract can look peaceful, it can look mature, it can look like no drama. But what many people don't realize is that no drama is sometimes no depth. It's not always peace. Sometimes it's emotional avoidance dressed as stability. This is why an avoidant may marry someone who is less triggering, not because they are more compatible in their soul, but because they are more compatible with the avoidance coping strategy. The avoidance coping strategy is distance, control, and minimization. They regulate their emotions by staying slightly removed. They protect themselves by keeping things undefined. They avoid emotional exposure by keeping conversations on the surface. And the dynamic they marry is the one that allows those strategies to continue without constant conflict. If a partner doesn't require much emotional intimacy, the avoidance distance isn't challenged. If a partner admires them too much to demand accountability, the avoidant doesn't have to repair. If a partner values structure over emotional depth, the avoidant can commit to the structure and still stay protected emotionally. That's what it means to marry a dynamic. Now here's the painful part. When you were the high connection person, you weren't just person to them. You were an invitation to transformation. You were a mirror. You were a relationship that made their emotional defenses visible. Your love didn't let them hide. Your questions didn't let them stay vague. Your needs didn't let them pretend that a half relationship was enough. You asked for emotional presence. And emotional presence is precisely what a fearful avoidant nervous system experiences as danger. So they may have felt intensely about you, but intensity doesn't equal readiness. Intensity can actually activate fear. It can activate childhood wounds. It can activate shame. It can activate the internal voice that says, I'm going to fail. I'm going to be trapped. I'm going to be controlled. I'm going to be rejected. So to protect themselves, they retreat from the dynamic that demands growth and they move toward the dynamic that demands less exposure. This is why they might call the safe bet easy. But easy can mean, I don't have to be emotionally brave. Easy can mean, I can stay the same. Easy can mean, I can avoid conflict by avoiding honesty. Easy can mean, my partner won't call me out. That's not always a mature choice, sometimes it's a fear-based choice. And here's something else people rarely talk about. An avoidant can be deeply lonely inside a marriage they chose for safety. Because if the dynamic is built on avoidance, the relationship becomes stable but emotionally thin. They may fulfill the roles, they may do the responsibilities, they may look committed, but the deeper emotional bond can remain underdeveloped. They may not feel trapped, but they also may not feel truly known. And being unknown is safer, but it's also lonely. So what do they get instead of deep intimacy? They get comfort through predictability. They get validation through admiration. They get stability through structure. They get peace through low emotional demand. And if they've lived their whole life fearing emotional exposure, those things feel like success. They can say, this works. But the question is, does it heal? Does it deepen? Does it build real emotional intimacy? Or does it simply maintain a life that looks fine while the heart stays guarded? Now bring it back to you, the viewer. This keynote exists to break your comparison addiction. Because when an avoidant marries a dynamic, your worth was never the deciding factor. Your worth was never on trial. Your value was not being measured against another person's value. What was being measured was threat level to their defenses. You were not rejected because you lacked something. You were often rejected because you were too real, too deep, too honest, too emotionally awake for their current capacity. And once you see that, you stop trying to become the safe bet. You stop shrinking your needs. You stop lowering your standards. You stop practicing emotional silence to look easy. Because if you become the dynamic they can tolerate, you might get chosen, but you'll also be choosing a relationship where your deepest self is not fully welcomed. So the lesson is not avoidants are bad. The lesson is, until an avoidant becomes self-aware and emotionally skilled, their commitment choices will lean toward dynamics that protect their wounds, not relationships that heal them. And your job is not to compete with someone else's dynamic. Your job is to choose a relationship where you don't have to trade depth for safety, where you don't have to trade honesty for stability, and where love is not built around protecting someone's defenses, but around building a life where both hearts can be seen without fear. If you were the high connection person they ran from, it doesn't mean you weren't enough, it often means you were real. And this keynote matters because it attacks the most poisonous belief an avoidant leaves behind in you. The belief is, if I had been calmer, easier, less emotional, less deep, less honest about my needs, they would have stayed. And that belief is a trap. It trains you to shrink. It trains you to self-edit. It trains you to blame your love for someone else's fear. Ladies and gentlemen, real love feels like danger to an avoidant because real love requires presence. It requires consistency. It requires emotional visibility. And emotional visibility is exactly what their nervous system has been taught to avoid. So when you were real, when you wanted clarity, when you wanted depth, when you wanted repair, you weren't being too much. You were activating the parts of them that are still untrained, unhealed, and terrified of exposure. This is where the audience needs to understand the difference between intensity and dysfunction. Avoidants often label healthy emotional intimacy as intensity, because to them intimacy feels intense. A simple conversation about feelings can feel like pressure. A request for consistency can feel like a demand. A desire for closeness can feel like suffocation. Not because your needs are unreasonable, but because their nervous system interprets closeness as loss of control. They learned that depending on someone is risky, that being needed is overwhelming, that being seen too deeply leads to shame, criticism, or abandonment. So when you bring real love, their body doesn't always say, "This is safe." Their body says, "This is threatening." And here's the painful irony. You probably approached them with empathy. You likely tried to be gentle. You likely communicated in soft ways. You tried to make it easy for them. You gave space. You explained calmly. You reassured them. You adjusted your tone. You learned their triggers. You tried to love them in a way they could tolerate. But the problem was never your tone. The problem was that your love was asking for a relationship that they didn't yet have the capacity to hold. So they did what avoidants do. They reframed your reality to protect their defenses. They called your needs too much. They called your questions pressure. They called your desire for clarity drama. They called your emotional honesty problems. Because if they can label you as the source of discomfort, they don't have to face the truth that the discomfort was coming from inside them. It was coming from their fear of closeness, their fear of failing, their fear of being responsible for someone's heart. This is why the high connection person often becomes the scapegoat. Not because you were wrong, but because you were a mirror. You reflected their inconsistency. You reflected their emotional shutdown. You reflected the gap between what they wanted and what they were willing to give. And mirrors are painful when you're not ready to change. Now here's what real means in this keynote. Real means you weren't playing games. You weren't giving half love and calling it love. You weren't hiding your feelings to look cool. You weren't pretending you didn't care. You didn't call breadcrumbs effort. You didn't call avoidance independence. You weren't satisfied with chemistry while your nervous system was suffering. You wanted something that could actually last. You wanted communication that could actually repair. You wanted consistency that could actually feel safe. And that's why you triggered them. Because consistency requires responsibility. And responsibility is what they avoid when they avoid intimacy. So when they choose the safe bet, it can feel like you lost. You can feel replaced. You can feel like the world rewarded the smaller, easier, quieter person. And your mind will start doing dangerous math. Maybe if I had been less deep, I would have been chosen. But listen closely, being chosen by an avoidance fear is not a win. It is a role. It is being selected as the person who will not disturb their defenses. And yes, some avoidants marry that person. But that marriage is not proof that the avoidant became emotionally healthy. It's proof that their nervous system found a setup where it can stay protected. It's proof they found a dynamic that doesn't activate them. And being non-activating is not the same as being loved deeply. This keynote is meant to restore your dignity. Because when you were real, you were offering something many people never offer, emotional truth. And emotional truth is not too much. It is the foundation of secure love. The reason it felt intense is because you were not willing to live in emotional fog. You were not willing to build a future on mixed signals. You were not willing to stay in a relationship where you had to guess. So the right conclusion inside this keynote is not, I should be less. The right conclusion is, I should be with someone who is capable. Someone whose nervous system doesn't confuse intimacy with danger. Someone whose heart doesn't panic when you ask for clarity. Someone who doesn't need you to shrink for them to stay. Because the most heartbreaking thing you can do is take an avoidance limitations and turn them into your identity. You can spend years trying to become easier, quieter, less emotional, less deep, and one day you wake up and realize you achieved your goal. You became the safe bet, but you also became a stranger to yourself. You got picked, but you lost your voice. You got commitment, but you lost your truth. So yes, if you were the high connection person they ran from, it doesn't mean you weren't enough. It often means you were real, and real love feels like danger to someone who has built their entire identity around emotional protection. And the moment you stop personalizing that, you stop chasing people who need you to be smaller, and you start choosing a love that doesn't require you to disappear to be held. Don't become the safe bet. That's the sixth keynote, and it's the final punch because it challenges the coping strategy most people adopt after an avoidant relationship. When an avoidant leaves or commits to someone, easier. The wounded part of you starts rewriting your personality as the problem. You start thinking, maybe I should need less, maybe I should talk less, maybe I should be cooler, quieter, more distant, more patient, more low maintenance. You start believing that the secret to being chosen is becoming emotionally smaller. And if you do that, you might get commitment from someone who fears depth, but you will pay for it with your identity. Ladies and gentlemen, the most dangerous transformation after an avoidant is not that you become stronger, it's that you become quieter in all the places you were meant to be alive. You stop asking questions. You stop stating needs. You stop expecting repair, because fog feels safer than rejection. You start calling breadcrumbs effort, because effort is easier to accept than the truth. You start adjusting your standards to keep someone comfortable. And yes, that can make you feel more marriageable to an avoidant, because you're no longer triggering their fear. But what you're really doing is building a relationship around someone else's defense system. And a relationship built around someone else's defenses will eventually suffocate you. Because the safe bet role is not love, it's an agreement. The agreement says, I won't ask you to go deep and you won't leave. The agreement says, I will accept emotional distance as normal and you will stay committed in structure. The agreement says, we will keep things calm on the surface, even if there's loneliness underneath. It's stable, but it's not always intimate. It's peaceful, but it's not always warm. It's consistent, but sometimes only in routine, not in emotional presence. So the sixth keynote tells the viewer, stop competing for a role that will cost you your soul. Because if you become the safe bet, you might be chosen for marriage, but you'll be chosen for manageability, not for depth. You'll be chosen because you don't demand their growth, not because they cherish your full self. You'll be chosen because you keep your emotions contained, not because they can hold them with love. And that creates a quiet tragedy. You end up committed but still alone. Now this keynote is not an attack on quiet people or low demand personalities. Some people are naturally calm, naturally independent, naturally low drama, and that can be healthy. The issue is not being calm, the issue is shrinking out of fear. The issue is changing your needs to earn someone's safety. The issue is becoming easy to avoid so someone will stay. Because secure love does not require you to be less. Secure love expands you. Secure love makes you safer to be honest. Secure love can tolerate your feelings without punishing you. Secure love can repair conflict without disappearing. Secure love doesn't confuse needs with pressure. So if you have to become a safe bet to keep someone, you are not building a secure relationship, you are building a tolerable arrangement. And the viewer needs to hear what happens next if they try this strategy. At first, it feels empowering. You stop texting first. You stop explaining. You play it cool. You don't ask for much. You seem unbothered. And suddenly the avoidant is calmer around you. They show up more. They commit more. It looks like success. But slowly the cost appears. You begin to lose contact with your own inner truth. You start watching yourself. You start censoring yourself. You start questioning whether you're allowed to want closeness. You start feeling guilty for basic needs. And because you're not expressing them, they don't get met. So you're committed, but emotionally hungry. That hunger doesn't disappear. It leaks, it becomes resentment. It becomes numbness. It becomes emotional shutdown. It becomes you becoming avoidant too, not because that's who you are, but because that's what you had to become to survive the relationship. And then one day you wake up and realize the relationship stayed, but you disappeared. This is why the sixth keynote is the final payoff. It turns the focus away from them and back to you. It asks the most important question. What kind of love do you actually want? Do you want love that feels calm because nothing is ever addressed, or love that feels calm because both people are emotionally safe? Do you want stability that comes from silence, or stability that comes from repair? Do you want commitment that comes from you shrinking, or commitment that comes from mutual courage? Because real love isn't a safe bet, it's a brave bet. It's two people risking honesty. It's two people tolerating discomfort to protect the bond. It's two people learning each other's nervous systems and showing up anyway. It's two people saying, I want you fully, and I'm willing to do the work to be safe for you. So the most empowering message to the viewer is this. Don't become the safe bet. Don't edit your needs into silence. Don't turn your depth into shame. Don't trade your voice for someone's comfort. If someone can only love you when you are smaller, they don't love you. They love the version of you that makes them feel safe. And you were not born to be someone's emotional convenience. You were born to be loved in full. So instead of asking, how do I become the one they marry? Ask the better question, who is brave enough to marry the real me? The one who can hold depth without fear. The one who can repair without running. The one who doesn't need you to shrink. Because being chosen by someone who is emotionally secure is worth more than being tolerated by someone who chooses safety over intimacy. And the moment you stop trying to be the safe bet, you stop losing yourself to people who were never ready to hold you.